Last time I left you with a promise and an uncomfortable idea. The idea was this: if you're running out of air, you almost certainly don't have too little. You have too much and you're wasting it. The promise was that this episode we'd go find the leak. So let's go find it. Grab your coffee. This one gets into the good stuff. It starts at the onset. Almost every breath problem I diagnose starts at the very beginning of the sound, the onset. That's the technical word for how you start a note. And it turns out the way you begin a note largely decides how much air you are about to burn through. There are a few ways to start a note, and each one has a personality. Each one prefers to lead somewhere. Start with the breathy one, because it's the most common and most expensive. The proper name is aspirate onset. You can hear it easily. There's a little puff of air before the tone arrives. Functionally, that's exactly what's happening. You've started exhaling before your vocal folds have fully come together. A few milliseconds you'd barely notice, or it can stretch out for hundreds of milliseconds into a clearly breathy attack. And the longer and louder that breath sounds, the more air you're spending before you've sung a single real note. Here's why it matters so much. Every onset tends toward a matching fold configuration. Not always, but unless you steer it somewhere else, it's going to follow its preferred path. And the aspirate onset's path leads straight to breathy phonation. Caffier and colleagues put numbers in this 2018 study, flagging the aspirate onset as the signature feature of breathy production in professional non-classical singers. The leaky setup you hear at the very start of the note is the same one running underneath the whole phrase. So it pulls you toward a fold state with the posterior glottal chink, a small opening at the back of the vocal folds that just won't close. And an opening that won't close is quite literally leaking air the entire time you sing. Air's escaping that isn't driving any sound. You get that lovely breathy quality, and to be clear, that quality is gorgeous and wildly popular across a lot of genres, so I'm not telling you to never use it. You're just burning through your usable air much faster because some of it is hissing out the back the whole time. The other onsets have their own tendencies. A glottal onset tends towards firmer, more pressed closure. Think of the little catch at the start of the word apple, where the folds press together and release. A smooth, coordinated onset where breath and closure arrive at the exact same instant tends towards a balanced setup where the folds meet cleanly without that extra squeeze. None of these is training your folds into some permanent state, just to be clear. They're just the natural road each onset likes to travel. Aspirate happens to travel toward breathy. So if you're singing in a breathy pop style and you're frustrated you can't sustain a long classical length phrase, that's not a character flaw. That's physics. The style itself is built on an air leak. Long phrases in that setup are nearly impossible until you change the underlying fold behavior. A crucial exception: the developing voice. Before we go any further, I have to plant a flag here because this one matters enormously and it gets missed constantly. If you are working with a young voice, say a male voice early in puberty, or a female voice anywhere from the onset of puberty through the early 20s, that breathy gap is expected. The breathy tone is normal, and it's something you should generally leave alone because in most cases, it resolves on its own as the voice matures. Here's what's happening. During the rapid growth of puberty, the vocal folds develop fast, and the little muscles that close them, the muscles of adduction, simply haven't caught up in strength yet. So the folds don't fully meet and you get breathiness. But those muscles will grow and strengthen like everything else in the body. It's not a fault to correct, it's a stage to respect. Push too hard to fix, and you're fighting the singer's own development. The diagnosis tree. I keep running out of air. So a student comes to me and says the classic line, I keep running out of air in this phrase. Here's how I actually work through it, because the answer depends entirely on the situation. The very first thing I ask is, what is the phrase? Where does it sit? What are we trying to do? And most important, how long is it? Because there is a world of difference between a phrase that is 2 measures long, about 3 seconds, and a phrase that's 14 measures long and is, frankly, a Herculean athletic feat. And the funny thing is, people walk in with both and describe them the exact same way. If it's a short phrase and you're running out of air, the cause is usually obvious the moment you listen. There's a ton of breath noise, lots of aspirated onsets. Maybe you blew half your air out on a single explosive consonant. Maybe you just didn't take a decent breath to begin with. And you know what? It's usually all of the above at once. Short phrase, empty tank. That's almost always a leak problem, and a fixable one. If it's a long phrase, the conversation changes completely. If you are getting through most of a 14-measure line, you're probably already doing a lot right. We're not patching open gates anymore, we're hunting for efficiency at the margins. Are you in the most economical fold configuration? Maybe you sing it a little lighter, a little thinner. Or maybe, and this surprises people, you flip into a true belt, because a good belt can move less air than a soft classical style tone. That sounds backwards, so let me explain. Back in 2008, a voice scientist named Eva Bjorkner ran a study comparing musical theater belters to opera singers. And she found the belters were working with higher pressure under the folds, but lower airflow through them. The folds grip harder and tighter, so less air slips past per second. High pressure, low fold. So, if it's stylistically appropriate and it sits in a workable range, belt might be the correct answer for sustaining a long line. And sometimes the real answer isn't how do we get through this phrase at all. Sometimes it's where do we put a breath? A well-placed, well-disguised breath can turn an impossible phrase into an easy one. There's no medal for refusing to breathe. The last variable is the one nobody wants to hear. Time. Do we have 6 months, or do you have an audition next week? I'm straight with my students about this. In a week, we're not finding much new efficiency. Over 6 months? Maybe. The deepest kind of change, rebuilding how you fundamentally use the instrument, can take 2 or 3 years, if it fully happens at all. The fix has to fit the timeline. Building the bridge from breathy to closed. Let's say we've got an adult singer with that breathy, leaky setup, and they really do need firmer closure for the music they want to sing. How do we get there? I usually build towards it through glottal onsets. They tend toward that firmer, more pressured closure we're after, and they're a little easier to learn than a perfectly coordinated onset. But find the glottal onset is hard to do on command, so we cheat with language. English is full of word cues. The word apple has a delightful little glottal onset baked right in. Try to start it with an aspirate puff instead, and you'd accidentally say Happle, a word that doesn't exist. So the word itself teaches the feeling. Get them to notice it there. And now they've got a reference point. This is also where a spectrogram can earn its keep. On a spectrogram, a breathy or aspirate onset shows up as a fuzzy noise, while a hard glottal onset shows up as a clean vertical line, a sharp stripe straight up and down. So suddenly there's an obvious visual cue. Aim for the line, not the fuzz. For a lot of singers, seeing it is what makes it click. But a warning on spectrograms, and I mean this, don't live in them. A spectrogram is perfectly, ruthlessly accurate to your microphone, and your microphone is far more sensitive than any listener's ear, especially from across the room. So the deeper you stare into one, the more flaws you'll find to chase. And most of them are things no human ear would ever catch. You can spend forever fixing stuff that doesn't matter. The practice itself is a ladder. We start with the onset in isolation, just the attack, over and over. Because if you can't do it cleanly on its own, there's basically no chance you'll pull it off in the chaos of a real phrase. Once it's reliable, we'll take into a phrase from the student's actual song, usually starting on a vowel, and we deliberately plant glottal onsets throughout. One catch: if a word doesn't start with a vowel, it usually won't be aspirate anyway. The exception is a voiceless consonant, like an S or an F, which is breathy by nature. There, we have to work on purpose, starting from that breathy sound and steering toward a clean one. There's no single recipe. It depends on the vowel, the consonant, the line, the style. It's variable. That's the job. And the artistry of it. Making a glottal onset musical instead of harsh comes second. First, can you do it? Can you do it consistently? Polish comes after capability. And the fastest tool for the polish is recording yourself and listening to it. Because this is the universal experience. A singer plays back an onset they were sure was a violent percussive overstatement and goes, "Oh, that was fine." Things feel enormous in your own head and land far gentler in reality. The recording is the truth teller. The great lie: sensation versus reality. The gap between what you feel and what's real isn't a quirk. It's one of the central truths of singing, and it deserves its own moment. For most of the vocal anatomy, you have very little reliable sense of what's actually going on in there. My favorite example: vowels. We think of bright E as small and pinched, and an ah, like in father, as this big, wide, open cavern in the throat. The reality is almost exactly backwards. For ah, the tongue sits low and far back, choking off much of the throat. For E, the tongue rides high and forward, and the throat is the one that's more open. It's the mouth that closes down. The vowel that feels open is the constricted one. The vowel that feels tiny is the roomy one. And that's fine, doesn't break anything, but it tells you exactly how unreliable that felt sense is. So, what can you trust? Trust the mechanics, not the sensations, especially up in the filter. The resonating spaces of your throat, your sinuses, your face, sensation up there is wildly unreliable. A cold, allergies, a stuffy nose, any of those can completely scramble what you feel without changing what you actually sound like. What's far more consistent is action based. When I raise my larynx, I get this. When I move my tongue here, I get that. Those cause and effect relationships hold. Chasing a feeling in your face is asking for an inconsistent, frustrating time. The one lower body sensation that is a reasonable anchor in the torso engagement we built in part 1. With one catch, your sense of effort drifts over time. A 7 out of 10 effort today might 6 months from now turn out to have really been a 3 once you've gotten stronger and recalibrated. So even your trusty torso anchor is a moving target. It means your range of available effort is quietly expanding underneath you. The rabbit hole at the bottom of the breath. Here's one for the nerds because somebody always notices it. Singing uses a far wider range of lung capacity than speaking does. We go low, deep into the tank on long phrases. Now, there is a resting point, the spot your chest naturally settles to when you stop doing anything. The researchers call it functional residual capacity, and it sits right around 40% of your total usable air. Watson and Hickson measured this in opera singers back in 1985 and put that number at almost exactly 40% for every singer they tested. At that point, everything's at equilibrium. The recoil forces cancel out. Above it, the natural recoil is helping push air out, which is the territory we usually talk about. But below it, something flips. The recoil starts trying to pull air back in. So to keep singing down there, you have to actively work against it. Your abdominals take over as the main engine, squeezing out the last of the air, with the internal intercostals pitching in. Watson and his colleagues confirmed with muscle activity recordings in 1989. A 2025 study by Baker and colleagues watched it happen in real time. As singers dropped below about 40% of their air, abdominal activation climbed, step by step. It's part of the breath support almost nobody practices. And it's absolutely real on the long, demanding phrases. It's a big reason singers go wavery and unstable right at the end of a long line. They've hit the bottom of the tank, the recoil has reversed on them, and they've never once practiced the act of actually exhaling down there. Now, is this something to drill obsessively? For most singers, no. It only becomes the real problem when the phrase itself is long enough to push you to that threshold. More often, you blew through your air so wastefully that you ended up down there by accident. For an advanced singer chasing really long phrases, it'd be a delight to train. For everyone else, it's mostly worth knowing it exists. What all of this buys you. So, you do the work, you close the leak, you clean up the onsets, you build the torso conditioning, you get consistent. What do you actually get? The answer is options. Too many things, but options most of all. The obvious one is phrase length. Use less air, sing longer, but it goes well beyond that. You gain enormous dynamic control, and the surprising part is that it's the soft end that opens up the most. True quiet singing is hard, and it demands great breath control. Your loud singing changes too, less noisy, richer. Range tends to grow, though it's hard to say how much of that is better breath and how much is just that you've been singing more. You get the control to navigate the tricky middle of your voice and choose to be louder or softer, thicker or thinner, because you decided to, instead of because your technique forced your hand. Elaborate runs and ornaments become viable. The whole instrument opens up into a menu of choices instead of a short list of things you're able to survive. You're never done. I'll leave you with the reality check because it's the most important thing I know about breath support. You never finish working on it. Breath support is the one skill you don't get to master and set down. It is always going to be the thing that slips the moment you stop thinking about it. And it's almost always going to be the culprit when something goes wrong, even for advanced singers. When the voice falls apart, the failure underneath is nearly always too much subglottal pressure, not too little. That's the whole more is wrong thesis coming full circle. The beautiful part is that the fix, in the moment, is usually instant. You don't even need to stop and reset, just re engage the torso and you're right back at it. But here's the deeper truth: we're never done as singers because the voice itself is never done. It keeps changing, it keeps aging. And this is the part that's both beautiful and a little cruel. The voice matures in a way no other instrument does. You might lose the ability to play piano, but the piano keeps right on playing perfectly as long as it's maintained. The voice isn't like that. The voice really does change. What you could do 5 years ago isn't what you can do today, for better and for worse. So we keep working. And because so much of the voice is muscle, the moment you stop putting in the work, it weakens and you lose control faster than you otherwise would. And look, I'd push back on anyone who thinks they've mastered any skill in singing. Even something as simple as a major third. Did you really nail a perfect major third every single time? Or was it just close? The better you get, the closer it gets. But perfect every time, nothing left to improve? I find that pretty unlikely. And I mean, there's always something more. That's breath support top to bottom. The big idea, if you take nothing else, stop reaching for more. Get curious about where your air is actually going. Close the leaks. Give your tension a job in the right place. And trust what you do over what you feel. Then keep doing it forever, because the instrument keeps changing under your hand. If this is the kind of thinking you want more of, the best next step is to just stop thinking about it and go watch it happen in your own voice. That's what Voci is for. It shows you your air, your onsets, your closure in real time. So the stuff we talked about today stops being abstract and starts being something you can see and fix. Come try it at www.voicescience.org. I think you'll be surprised what your voice has been doing this whole time. Thanks for spending this one with me. Until next time, keep singing smart.